So one of the questions I get asked most frequently in the comment sections of my videos is about my qualifications. And usually these questions are framed in a pretty transparently hostile way. I think it's an effort to dismiss my videos or undermine my credibility by implying that I'm somehow talking above my station. And my response to these questions is usually pretty much the same thing. I usually ask something like, why does it matter what my qualifications are? Because the way that I see it, if there's something I've said in my videos that someone disagrees with, what I'd hope is that person can tell me what I've said and then explain why they think I've got it wrong. Most people fail at the first step. They can't tell me what I've said that they actually disagree with. It's my experience that most people will repeat something that they think I've said or something that they think was implied, but they very rarely actually quote what my words were, even when I explicitly ask them to do that. But I'm getting sidetracked here, so back to my qualifications. And I often think, like, what would it add or take away from something I've said in my videos if I did or didn't have some kind of certificate or qualification? Well, hopefully nothing. I'd like to think that every statement of fact that I've made in these videos is supported by evidence, and every speculation or opinion is qualified as such. I know I must fall short of that sometimes, and hopefully people will call me out when I do. But I never ask people to take anything I say on the strength of my experience or academic qualifications. So to my mind, the question is kind of irrelevant. Even if I failed third grade, it wouldn't somehow change the truth of anything that I've said in my videos. Having said that, there is a certain frustration to my approach of never responding to these kind of questions because people mostly take my lack of response as evidence that I don't have any qualifications. Here's a typical exchange from Facebook recently.
Dear science blogger, what are your qualifications in biology?
What would it matter? Did I make a mistake? If I told you I have a PhD, would that change your opinion of what I said?
No qualifications in biology then.
And I think a lot of people feel like they've won some kind of argument or got one over me when I don't respond directly to the question. But there's another good reason not to fire back directly. And I've learned this the hard way because I have in the past been baited into responding and given my academic qualifications. And what you'll find is that the person demanding to know what your qualifications are is just never satisfied. If you tell them that you have an undergraduate degree, they'll just laugh and say that they have a master's, or if you have a PhD, they'll tell you that they know a full professor who knows better, or, they'll ask for your qualifications and then they'll respond by accusing you of bragging or lying. So apart from my feeling that qualifications are irrelevant, there's almost nothing to gain from responding to this line of questioning, and it's almost always better to keep the focus on a relevant point of discussion. Because I think when people are asking questions like this, it's often because they've been confronted with some information that they find challenging, and rather than processing that, they would look for a way to dismiss it. So if I get sucked into one-upping people with degree titles and university rankings, I've already kind of lost, because distracting from the videos that I make is really the whole point of this kind of question. But I do want to clear this up, and I'll ruin my audience retention on this video by saying now that I do have a PhD. It's in cell and molecular biology, and I also have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. They're not just wall decorations. I'm an author on a few different peer-reviewed publications in a couple of different fields. So if you've been directed to this video because you've asked a question about my qualifications, hopefully this clears that up for you. And with that out of the way, I think it is worth talking a little bit more about what a PhD is. So when I started thinking about making this video, I did a little bit of research to see what other people have said about PhDs on YouTube. And I came across this video. It's titled, "A PhD is a beginner's qualification." Now this triggered me just enough to actually click on the video to watch it, and James Hayton, PhD, kept me engaged with his content by telling me something that I pretty much agreed with. This is a masterclass in making good titles. And the point that James made, much more eloquently than me, is that you shouldn't look at the PhD as somehow the pinnacle of academic achievement. Getting your PhD is not like finishing the final level of college. Taking a PhD really is a first step more than it is a progression from undergraduate, because whilst undergraduate degrees are mostly about developing knowledge in a field of study, a PhD is about learning how to advance a field of study. It's research. And these are quite different things, and they require different skill sets. Not to say that there isn't some research in undergraduate degrees, and let's not think too hard about where master's degrees fit in here. I'm just trying to draw the big distinctions. And framing a PhD as a beginner's qualification is helpful because I do think some people are too easily impressed by the title, and they might think that everyone who has a PhD is on, roughly the same level, but that's just not true. I know a number of people who have PhDs, and I consider them to be, well, just like stupid. Like, I actually think they're low IQ individuals. But there are people with PhDs who go on to have these high impact research careers. These are the people publishing papers every month, and they have thousands of citations, and they'll progress through the various job titles at universities to eventually lead their own groups and departments, institutes, and spin out companies. But the PhD, it's just the start. So I'm never impressed by the title of PhD alone. A while ago, I talked about Daniel Doc Newsom, who claimed to have no less than 7 PhDs. And in that video, I questioned the logic of doing 7 PhDs. They're all fake, by the way. He hasn't done any, of course. At the time, I said it would be like passing a driving test 7 times, because a PhD is what grants you entry into a research career. And I think it's an analogy worth repeating here. Everyone driving a car has a driver's license, but some people are really great drivers and some people are pretty terrible. Lewis Hamilton doesn't have a special golden driver's license. And to stretch this analogy to breaking point, people like Doc Newsom, who don't have PhDs but claim to, these are the uninsured and unlicensed drivers on the road. They pose a threat to the other road users because their driving skills have not been evaluated, and instead of taking the test like everyone else, they print off a fake ID. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to crash, but you should question the motivation behind their deception. And on the subject of deception, I think it's worth touching on the confusion between the different types of degrees that might enable someone to call themselves a doctor. This varies in different parts of the world, but most obviously we all know about medical degrees. Someone who takes a medical degree can, with the appropriate license and registration, treat patients and diagnose illnesses and write prescriptions. We'd call that person a doctor, and they'd work in a hospital or surgery. Then we have various types of research degrees, like PhDs and DPhils, and these can be granted in any subject like history or chemistry, and these are the qualifications that grant you access to a career in academic or professional research. Now, it's important to bear in mind that a lot of medical doctors will also take a separate PhD degree if they want to do medical research, although that's not always necessary. And a lot of PhD holders will work in medical research without being a medical doctor. So if you read a typical clinical trial report, you'll often see a mixture of MDs, PhDs, and people with both titles. The PhDs might develop the treatments, run the animal trials, and design the human trials. The medical doctors could be involved in all of that, but they can also see patients, and they would often have the role of organising the recruitment and assessment of trial participants, for example. And it's in this space of confusion that quacks and frauds with PhDs, both real and fake, try to exploit people who aren't clued in. Someone might see someone calling themselves a doctor and wearing a lab coat and assume that they must be a board-certified medical doctor. But the skills and training required to earn an MD are very different to those required to be a PhD. A medical doctor will have training in ethics and statistics and how to talk to patients. A PhD might just know a lot about a specific type of beetle. Okay, so that's slightly disingenuous, but it does bring me to another point that I think is worth making about my qualifications. My PhD is in cell and molecular biology. And like all PhDs, the actual subject matter of my thesis has a very narrow focus. When you finish your PhD, you'll have the broad skills to do research, hopefully, but you'll only really be an expert in the techniques and literature of a really niche subject if you've done your PhD right. And that can be a lonely feeling because there's no one to talk to about what you've spent years of your life doing. So again, people demanding to know if I have a PhD have the wrong conception, because the subjects I talk about on my channel are not what I would consider to be, graduate student level. I'm talking about the really obvious things like, does a virus exist? Which elements are in the human body? What is a protein? How does the pH scale work? How can we evaluate cancer treatment claims? Whilst I might have used some of the skills and knowledge I learned during my PhD to research and make these videos, I probably would have made them in much the same way if I didn't have a PhD. And that kind of brings me to my final thoughts on this. When I see people using their PhD title outside of where it's relevant, I can find that to be quite awkward. You see this on Twitter a lot, and these debates flare up every now and again. Often it's about a woman not being referred to by their preferred title. I try to use mine sparingly and when it's most appropriate so I don't look like an arsehole. And you can contrast my approach to the kind of people that I criticize who often depend really heavily on their job titles or academic qualifications. Kate Shamarani is one of them.
Hey health seekers, it's Kate Shamarani here, natural nurse in a toxic world, and I am indeed a nurse, a registered nurse on the register. I'm an independent nurse prescriber, 35 years in total, and I'm a personal nutritionist. I still work as a nurse, yes, I do, and I also work as a personal nutritionist.
Dr. Robert Morse, the pretend ND, is another. Mark Steele can hardly speak a sentence without claiming to be a weapons systems expert. And I've chosen not to go down that road. I don't want people to feel like I think I know better because I have a PhD. I do think I know better, though. Most often it's just because I've applied a modicum of critical thinking. But just to be clear, it is a difficult line to tread, and I do respect people who think the title is appropriate to use on YouTube and other social media. I think it's right that people who go to university and have the privilege of doing a PhD would have some kind of obligation to share what they've learned. We don't need academics in ivory towers, and I'm doing my tiny bit on this channel. If you're an idiot with a stupid idea about molecular biology, you can come on my channel and leave a comment about it, and I'll tell you why you're wrong. And if you tick me off, I'll call you an arsehole, and I consider that to be a service. I don't think of people without PhDs as being beneath my level, and while some people might accuse me of going after the low-hanging fruit, what I'm actually doing here is taking people's ideas seriously when I criticize them, and I think that's what people want. Now I know that saying I never talk about my qualifications and then making a whole video on this subject is rank hypocrisy, but I needed some way to make you click on the video, and I've been considering talking more about my actual research on this channel, so this seemed like a fair place to start. And I also wanted to set the record straight, so the next time someone asks me this question, I can just refer them back to this video, and I won't feel so conflicted about how to deal with the question. This is a different kind of video for my channel. If you found it interesting or you really didn't like it, please do let me know. And if you find that you're not subscribed, please click the button. I'm afraid I won't be making it to 2,000 subscribers this year, which is a shame, but at least we've got an easy target for the new year.